Billionaire's disabled son was stuck in the mud until a poor black boy did something impossible. Liam Carter was used to being invisible. At 14, he had already learned that in Maplebridge, people like him weren't meant to be noticed. Every afternoon after school, he stocked shelves at the local grocery store for a few extra dollars, careful to smile politely at the customers who rarely looked him in the eye. His shoes were worn, his jacket thin, and his hands always smelled faintly of detergent from cleaning up spills no one else wanted to touch. But he never complained. Home was a tiny apartment on Willow Street, where the ceiling leaked when it rained and the heater worked only when it felt generous. Liam lived there with his grandmother, Martha Carter, a frail woman with a soft voice and a heart that wasn't as strong as it used to be. She was the only family he had left. His parents had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, leaving him with bills, grief, and a promise to take care of her no matter what. Every morning, before leaving for school, he made her tea, checked her medicine, and kissed her forehead like she used to do for him. Despite everything, Liam was proud. He didn't ask for help, not even when the fridge was nearly empty or when his shoes had holes big enough to feel the cold rain through. He worked hard, studied harder, and dreamed quietly of a better life. A life where his grandmother didn't have to choose between electricity and groceries. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. That gray afternoon began like any other. The sky hung low with clouds, and a sharp wind carried the smell of wet earth. Liam left the grocery store with a small bag of food, bread, milk, and a few cans of soup. He tucked it under his arm and started his usual shortcut through the park. The path was slippery with mud, and puddles reflected the dim light of the street lamps. He didn't mind. The rain had always calmed him, washing away the noise of the world. But that day something felt different. The park was unusually empty, except for the rustle of trees and the steady sound of rain hitting the ground. As he walked faster, hoping to get home before the storm worsened, he noticed a faint cry. At first he thought it was the wind. Then he heard it again. A child's voice, small and frightened, calling for help. Liam stopped. The sound came from near the edge of the park, where the ground sloped into a shallow pit that had turned into a pool of brown water. He squinted through the rain and saw a shape, a wheelchair, half sunken in the mud. Inside it was a boy, maybe 10 years old, his face pale and wet, his hands gripping the wheels that wouldn't move. The boy's lips trembled as he tried to call out again, but his voice cracked from the cold and fear. Not far from him stood an older woman, dressed neatly in a long coat, arguing on her phone. Her voice was sharp and impatient, as if she didn't even notice what was happening behind her. Liam looked around. People were walking by, 3 joggers, a man in a suit, a woman with a stroller. All of them passed within feet of the trapped boy, but none stopped. Some turned their heads for a moment, then quickly looked away. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to get muddy. Liam's heart pounded. He hesitated for just a second, feeling the cold seep through his clothes. He could walk away. It wasn't his problem. But the sound of the boy's quiet sob broke something inside him. Without thinking, he dropped his grocery bag onto the wet grass and ran toward the wheelchair. The mud sucked at his shoes as he waded through the water. The closer he got, the clearer the boy's fear became. His name, as Liam would soon learn, was Aiden Brooks, the only son of Nicholas Brooks, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city. But at that moment, Aiden wasn't anyone's son. He was just a terrified child stuck in the cold, surrounded by people who didn't care. Liam reached him and knelt, ignoring the rain that plastered his hair to his forehead. The wheelchair was jammed deep into the ground. He tried to pull, but the wheels barely moved. His arms ached, his shoes slipped, but he didn't stop. He tore off his old work shirt and wrapped it around the handles for a better grip. Still nothing. The mud was too thick, too heavy. The boy's breathing quickened. His lips turned blue. Liam knew he didn't have much time. He took a deep breath, wiped the rain from his eyes, and made a decision. He slid his arms under the boy and lifted with everything he had. The weight, the mud, the cold, it all fought against him. But slowly, painfully, he began to move forward, one step at a time. By the time they reached the bench under a nearby tree, both were soaked to the bone. Liam set Aiden down gently, wrapping his hoodie around the boy's shoulders. He rubbed Aiden's arms to keep him warm, his own teeth chattering from the cold. Then, from a distance, the sound of a car engine broke the silence. Tires splashed through puddles, and headlights cut through the rain. A black Rolls-Royce stopped near the park. The door opened and a tall man stepped out, his long coat immaculate despite the storm. He froze when he saw his son in the arms of a muddy teenager. And in that single frozen moment, two worlds collided, the world of wealth and the world of struggle. Neither of them knew it yet, but that encounter would change their lives forever. Nicholas Brooks wasn't a man easily caught off guard, but the sight before him left him frozen. His son, his only child, was trembling in the arms of a drenched, mud-covered boy. The billionaire's polished shoes sank slightly into the wet ground as he approached, his eyes flicking from Liam's torn jacket to Aiden's shivering body. It took only seconds for him to piece it together. The wheelchair was still stuck behind them, half submerged in the mud. No one else had stopped. Only this boy had. Liam stood up quickly, embarrassed by how filthy he was. He muttered an apology, brushing mud from his hands, but Nicholas didn't respond. He only knelt beside Aiden, checking his pulse, his face tight with panic. When Aiden whispered, "He saved me, Dad," Nicholas looked up at Liam with an expression that was hard to read, somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. "Get in," Nicholas said a moment later, his voice low but firm. "Both of you." Liam hesitated, glancing at the gleaming Rolls-Royce waiting on the curb. "Sir, I can't." "Please," Nicholas interrupted. "It's raining." Inside the car, the silence was heavy. Aiden leaned against Liam, still shaking, while Nicholas sat across from them, his gaze flicking between the two. Liam stared out the window, trying not to notice the polished interior, the faint smell of leather and cologne. When the car pulled up in front of a crumbling apartment building, Nicholas finally spoke. "You live here?" Liam nodded. "With my grandmother." Nicholas stepped out first, insisting on walking them to the door despite the rain. The hallway inside was dim, the walls peeling. When Martha Carter opened the door, her hand trembled on the frame. "Liam? What happened?" Before Liam could explain, Nicholas stepped forward, introducing himself and explaining what had happened. Martha's eyes widened when she recognized his name. Everyone in Maplebridge knew the Brooks family. They owned factories, offices, and entire city blocks. People whispered that Nicholas Brooks could buy the town if he wanted to. Yet here he was, standing in her living room, dripping rainwater onto the worn carpet. Nicholas's gaze lingered on the table cluttered with unpaid bills, the half-empty medicine bottles, the flickering light overhead. He stayed longer than he planned, asking questions quietly over a cup of weak tea. Questions that revealed more than Liam ever meant to share. He learned about the accident that took Liam's parents, about the part-time job, and about the way Liam always put his grandmother first. And though Nicholas didn't say it, something inside him shifted. That night, after they left, Martha sat Liam down. "Sometimes," she said softly, "kindness brings its own kind of storm. Be ready." The next day, Nicholas returned, not in a Rolls-Royce, but in a simpler car dressed in plain clothes. He brought medicine for Martha and food for the kitchen, insisting it was a thank you, not charity. Liam refused at first. He didn't want pity, but Nicholas's persistence, calm and unwavering, eventually wore him down. He even offered Liam a scholarship to Ridgeview Academy, the same elite school Aiden attended. It should have been a gift. Instead, it became a test. When Liam first walked into Ridgeview's gleaming halls, conversations stopped. His thrift store uniform looked out of place beside the tailored blazers of his classmates. Whispers followed him wherever he went, some curious, some cruel. He was the charity kid, the poor boy who got lucky. And though Aiden tried to stay by his side, even that drew comments. The billionaire's son and his project, someone sneered once. Liam pretended not to hear. But the hardest part wasn't the students, it was the adults. Some teachers treated him with distant politeness, others with quiet suspicion. During a school fundraiser, a parent asked Nicholas, in front of everyone, if that boy really belonged there. The word boy hung in the air, heavy with something uglier than classism. Nicholas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Liam smiled tightly, excused himself, and left early that night. Still, he didn't quit. Every insult, every sidelong glance, only made him study harder. He spent evenings at Aiden's house helping him with physical therapy and robotics projects. Slowly, their friendship deepened. But the more time he spent with the Brooks family, the more the whispers grew. Some of Nicholas's business partners weren't shy about their opinions. One evening, Liam overheard them while waiting outside the office. "You're really letting your son spend time with that boy?" one of them said. "You're setting a strange example, Nicholas. Charity's fine, but boundaries, my friend, boundaries." Nicholas didn't know Liam had heard. That night, when Liam went home, he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall. His grandmother noticed the silence. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. But it wasn't anything. It was the ache of realizing that no matter how hard he tried, some people would only ever see his skin, his poverty, and not his heart. Weeks turned into months. Liam worked on a robotics project with Aiden, an invention that could help wheelchairs move through mud and snow. They poured every free moment into it, soldering, testing, failing, and trying again. When the day of the competition arrived, the auditorium buzzed with reporters and sponsors. Liam stood beside Aiden as they unveiled their prototype, a machine born not of wealth but of empathy. It worked flawlessly. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. But as Nicholas came forward to congratulate them, one of the judges muttered under his breath, unaware that his microphone was still on. Didn't think the poor kid had it in him. The audience went silent. Liam felt every eye turn toward him. His chest tightened, but he forced a smile. He refused to let that moment take away what he'd built. Not the invention, not his dignity, not the bond that had formed between two families from opposite worlds. Nicholas stepped forward, placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, and looked straight into the camera. "He didn't just have it in him," he said. "He's the reason this exists." The applause that followed wasn't just for the invention. It was for something larger, something that, for the first time, began to challenge the quiet racism that had long been ignored. But for Liam, it was only the beginning. Because success didn't silence the whispers, it made them louder. And the next challenge waiting for him would test not his strength, but his forgiveness. The night of the awards ceremony should have been a celebration. The Hope Track wheelchair prototype that Liam and Aiden built had gained national attention, earning praise from engineers and humanitarians alike. Nicholas had arranged a formal dinner at a city hotel to honor them both. Reporters were invited, sponsors filled the hall, and cameras waited to capture the story of a billionaire's son and the poor black teenager who had defied expectations. But beneath the elegant lighting and polite applause, tension brewed. Not everyone in the room saw Liam as a hero. Some whispered that his presence was Nicholas's latest publicity move, while others questioned whether the boy's success was really his own. Liam felt the glances, sharp and cold, each one a reminder that acceptance in this world could vanish in an instant. Still, he smiled. He wasn't there for the cameras. He was there for Aiden, for his grandmother, and for the work they had done together. When Aiden rolled onto the stage to speak, his voice trembled but carried strength. "We built something," he said, "because one day, someone didn't walk away from me." He saw me when no one else did. The crowd clapped, soft at first, then stronger. Liam's eyes watered, but before he could take the stage, a man in a dark suit approached Nicholas's table. He was one of Nicholas's longtime investors, known for his arrogance and money. He leaned toward Nicholas and muttered, loud enough for others to hear, "Touching story. You really went all in on your charity project." Huh. Nicholas's jaw tightened. "That boy has a name," he said evenly. The man smirked. "Sure, but let's not pretend. You can dress him up, send him to fancy schools, but at the end of the day, he's not one of us." The table went silent. Liam, standing nearby, froze. He had heard every word. The applause on stage faded into background noise. The music, the laughter, it all blurred. His throat tightened, his vision clouded with humiliation and rage. Nicholas stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Say that again," he said, his voice low but shaking with fury. The man laughed under his breath. "You can't buy class, Nicholas. And you can't buy equality either. Some things don't change." For a moment, Liam thought Nicholas would strike him. But instead, the billionaire turned to the room, to every face watching, and said in a clear, trembling voice, "Then let's make them change." He motioned to Liam. "Come here." Liam hesitated, but Aiden waved him on. The spotlight followed him as he stepped onto the stage beside Nicholas. Every eye was on them, the billionaire and the boy covered in invisible scars. Nicholas took the microphone, his hand steady. "3 years ago," he began, "my son was trapped in the rain, sinking in the mud, and not one person stopped. Not one. Except him. He didn't see wealth or color. He saw a child who needed help. And that moment changed everything." He paused, scanning the room. "Tonight, I've heard words that remind me why that moment mattered. Words that prove we still have so far to go. So let's set the record straight. This young man isn't a project. He's not a symbol. He's family." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some clapped. Others stayed silent. The investor who'd spoken earlier stood, face flushed. "You can't seriously mean that," he spat. "You'd mix your family name with—" Before he could finish, Nicholas cut him off. "Yes, with him. Because family isn't about what you own. It's about what you owe to others. And I owe him more than I can ever repay." The hall erupted, half in applause, half in murmurs. Cameras flashed. Aiden clapped from his wheelchair, tears streaking his cheeks. But amid the chaos, Liam stood motionless. He didn't know whether to smile or cry. After the speech, reporters swarmed them, microphones thrust in their faces. Someone asked Liam how it felt to inspire the billionaire's family. The question stung, as if his worth existed only through their approval. He forced a polite answer, but inside, something cracked. Later that night, after the crowd dispersed, Liam slipped outside for air. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement, and the sound of traffic echoed like distant thunder. Nicholas found him leaning against a wall, his jacket soaked again, just like that day in the park. "You shouldn't have to hear things like that," Nicholas said quietly. Liam shook his head. "It's not the first time. It won't be the last." Nicholas exhaled, the weight of guilt heavy on his face. "I can't fix the world, Liam." "No," Liam said. "But maybe we can make people see it." Before Nicholas could respond, a voice called out behind them. It was the same investor, now furious, his pride wounded in front of the cameras. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he shouted at Liam. "You'll always be the charity case who got lucky." The words hit like a slap. Nicholas moved forward, but Liam stopped him. He looked the man straight in the eye. "You're wrong," he said. "I didn't get lucky. I worked. And one day you'll have to live with the fact that the boy you looked down on built something that lifted others." The man's mouth twisted, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain. Nicholas looked at Liam, pride flickering through the anger. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, Liam interrupted. Because silence is how this keeps going. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Nicholas nodded slowly. You're right. The two of them stood there in the downpour, the same rain that once separated their worlds now falling on both of them equally. Somewhere inside the hotel, Aiden was waiting, unaware that something irreversible had just shifted. Because that night wasn't just about an invention or an award, it was about a reckoning. The lines between power and humility, privilege and pain had blurred forever. And by the time the storm cleared, nothing about their lives or their city would ever be the same again. The storm eventually passed, but its echoes remained. In the weeks after that night, news of Nicholas Brooks's speech spread far beyond Maplebridge. The video of him standing beside Liam on that stage went viral, shared by parents, teachers, and strangers who saw more than a billionaire defending a boy. They saw a man admitting what so many refused to face: that money can build walls, but courage breaks them. For Liam, life changed in ways he never expected. Reporters came to his school, eager to paint him as a symbol of hope. Some called him the boy who bridged two worlds. Others tried to turn his story into something neat and polished, stripped of the quiet pain behind it. But he didn't care about the headlines. He cared about what came next. The Hope Track Foundation took off faster than anyone imagined. With Nicholas's support and Aiden's determination, they built custom wheelchairs for children who had never been able to leave their homes. Liam insisted that every model carry one rule: no profit, no fame, just purpose. He visited hospitals, schools, and community centers, often wearing the same worn-out jacket he'd owned when he first met Aiden. When people asked why, he'd smile and say, "Because it reminds me where I came from and who I'm still fighting for." Martha lived to see her grandson's success. On Sunday evenings, she'd sit at the long dining table in the Brooks mansion, laughing softly as Aiden showed her new designs. The two families, once divided by class and circumstance, now shared meals, stories, and quiet moments that no money could buy. Nicholas treated her with the same respect he gave his business partners, and in time, she became more like family than a guest. But not everything was easy. Change rarely is. For every person inspired by Liam's story, others scoffed, who said the Brooks family was trying too hard to look good. On social media, some twisted the story into something ugly, refusing to believe that a poor black boy could rise without someone pulling strings. Liam saw the comments, the cynicism, and sometimes it stung. But then he'd remember Aiden's laughter, his grandmother's smile, and the faces of the kids who could finally move freely because of what they'd built. Those moments were louder than the hate. 4 years later, Liam stood at the podium of Ridgeview Academy as valedictorian. The same school that once whispered behind his back is now filled with applause that shook the walls. Nicholas sat in the front row, his hands clasped tightly, and Aiden grinned beside him in a suit too big for his shoulders. When Liam began to speak, his voice was calm but steady. "I used to think family was something you were born into," he said. "But I've learned it's something you build, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's standing beside someone when the world walks away." He paused, scanning the crowd. "We talk about equality like it's a word, but it's not. It's a decision. Every day, in every small moment, you decide whether to look away or step into the mud." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted minutes. Nicholas's eyes glistened. Martha wiped her tears. And Aiden, smiling wider than anyone, whispered to himself, "That's my brother." Years later, when journalists asked Nicholas when he knew Liam was extraordinary, he didn't mention the invention, the scholarship, or the foundation. He simply said, "The moment he stepped into the mud." By then, the Hope Track Foundation had expanded to more than a dozen countries. Thousands of children had access to mobility for the first time. But the impact wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It reminded people that compassion is still the most powerful force in a divided world. In interviews, Liam often turned his attention away from himself. "This story isn't about me," he would say. "It's about everyone who's ever been overlooked and still chose kindness. It's about every hand that lifted another, even when no one was watching." He never forgot that rainy afternoon in Maplebridge. The mud, the cold, the fear, and the moment two lives collided. It had started as an act of instinct, but it became a lesson for a lifetime. That day taught him that true change begins not with power, but with presence. Not with wealth, but with will. And every Sunday, the Carter Brooks family kept their promise. No matter how busy life became, they met for dinner, laughter echoing through the house. Aidan would still tell the story to anyone who'd listen. "He didn't just pull me out of the mud, he pulled me out of loneliness." Liam always smiled and replied, "We lifted each other." Their story became more than a viral moment. It became a quiet revolution, a reminder that empathy is louder than hate, and courage is colorblind. So maybe the question isn't what happened that day in the rain. Maybe the real question is this: when the world turns away and someone calls for help, will you walk past, or will you step into the mud? If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about what you would have done that day in the park. Would you have walked away, or stepped into the mud like Liam did? Stories like this remind us how small choices can change lives forever. If you believe compassion still matters in this world, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us share more true and inspiring stories that uncover the power of humanity. Your support keeps these voices alive.